Every crime story has two sides: the event itself and the impact it leaves behind. Some cases fade into history. Others shape the foundation of a nation. They challenge the justice system, expose flaws, and force lawmakers to rewrite the rules that shape how we live today. On this episode of The Dark Side of My Room, we will be exploring 5 cases that changed the laws of the United States. Cases that reshaped investigations and even the rights people now rely on every day. Emmett Till and the Civil Rights Movement. In August of 1955, a crime in the small town of Money, Mississippi, shocked the world and helped ignite the Civil Rights Movement. This is the story of Emmett Till, a 14-year-old boy from Chicago whose death forced America to confront the reality of racial injustice. Emmett Louis Till was born on July 25, 1941, in Chicago. His friends called him Bobo. He loved jokes, baseball, and making people laugh. He grew up in a northern city where segregation was not enforced the same way it was in the South. At 14 years old, Emmett was excited to spend part of his summer vacation visiting family in the Mississippi Delta, a region still heavily controlled by racist attitudes and discriminatory laws. Before he left home, Emmett's mother, Mamie Till Mobley, warned him that Mississippi was different, a place where black children had to be extremely careful, even in everyday situations. Emmett understood, but he couldn't know how dangerous this trip would become. On August 24, 1955, Emmett visited Bryant's Grocery and Meat Market, a small store in Money, Mississippi. The shop was owned by Roy and Carolyn Bryant. Different witnesses later gave different accounts of what happened inside. Some said Emmett may have whistled or spoken casually to Carolyn Bryant, something considered unacceptable by local racist social norms. Others said nothing inappropriate happened at all, but whatever occurred, word spread quickly. And in the Jim Crow South, even a harmless interaction could lead to dangerous consequences for a black teenager. 4 days later, in the early morning hours of August 28th, Roy Bryant and his half-brother J.W. Millam went to the home of Emmett's relatives. They forced Emmett out of the house at gunpoint, in front of his great-uncle and cousins, and drove away with him. His family immediately feared for his life and notified authorities. What happened afterward was an act of racial violence that horrified the country. 3 days later, Emmett's body was found in the Tallahatchie River. The discovery devastated his family and community. When his body was returned to Chicago, Mamie Till Mobley made a decision that changed history. She insisted on an open casket funeral, saying, "I want the world to see what they did to my baby." Tens of thousands of mourners lined up to pay their respects. Photos of Emmett's body were published by Jet magazine and spread across the country, making it impossible for people to look away. In September 1955, Bryant and Millam were put on trial in Mississippi. Despite national attention and eyewitness testimony from Emmett's uncle, the all-white jury deliberated for just over an hour. They returned a not guilty verdict. Reporters later said the jury would have returned sooner if they hadn't stopped for a soda break. Just months after the trial, Bryant and Millam openly admitted their involvement in an interview with Look magazine. Because of double jeopardy laws, they could no longer be tried again. The injustice of Emmett Till's murder created a shockwave across the United States. Millions of Americans who had never experienced the brutality of segregation saw it clearly for the first time. His death became one of the catalysts for the Civil Rights Movement, influencing protests, marches, and new leaders in the fight for equality. But it didn't just change hearts. It changed laws in the decades after Emmett's death. His case helped build national pressure that contributed to the Civil Rights Act of 1957. This act established a civil rights division in the U.S. Justice Department and allowed federal prosecutors to intervene in cases of voter suppression. The public outrage surrounding Emmett Till's case helped fuel momentum for the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the landmark law that banned discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin, including in schools, workplaces, and public spaces. Till's murder and the activism sparked by it helped push lawmakers toward major reforms, protecting the voting rights of Black Americans, especially in the South, called Voting Rights Act of 1965. Over time, Emmett's legacy shaped how lawmakers understood racially motivated violence. By the 21st century, the U.S. began passing specific hate crime legislation, setting the groundwork for more modern protections by enacting the Federal Protections Against Hate Crimes. After more than 200 failed attempts, Congress finally passed a law making lynching a federal hate crime. President Biden signed it into law in 2022, naming it the Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act, directly in Emmett Till's honor. It took nearly 7 decades, but the United States finally put into law what many had been fighting for, since the day Emmett's mother showed the world what had happened to her son. Emmett Till's story didn't just spark a movement. It reshaped American civil rights law for generations. Emmett Till's story is heartbreaking, but vital. His bravery and his mother's courage helped transform American history, inspiring laws and movements that continue to protect people today. In the early 1930s, the United States was living through the Great Depression, a time when crime rates rose and the nation was hungry for heroes. One of those heroes was Charles Lindbergh, a world-famous aviator whose solo flight across the Atlantic made him an American icon. But in 1932, a shocking event involving his family captured the attention of millions. The case became national news almost instantly, not just because of who was involved, but because it exposed a major problem with U.S. law enforcement. Kidnapping was not automatically a federal crime. Before this case, state lines created enormous complications. Police could chase a suspect only within their own borders. The moment the suspect crossed into another state, everything stalled. Organized criminals knew they could avoid local police just by traveling a few miles. Kidnapping became a crime that was nearly impossible to prosecute across states. The Lindbergh case changed all of that. By 1932, Charles Lindbergh wasn't just a pilot. He was a symbol of American achievement. His home in Hopewell, New Jersey, was meant to be a quiet retreat, away from the constant media attention that followed him. But on the evening of March 1st, 1932, that quiet life ended. At around 9:00 p.m., the Lindbergh's household shifted from an ordinary evening into a moment that would echo across the nation. The family nurse, Betty Gow, went to check on the Lindbergh's 20-month-old son. Anne Morrow Lindbergh had just finished bathing, expecting him to be nearby. But when Gow looked into the nursery, the crib was empty. Alarmed, she immediately alerted Charles Lindbergh, who hurried upstairs. On the windowsill, he found an envelope, a ransom note, written with strange spelling, uneven handwriting, and an unsettling tone. Realizing something was terribly wrong, he began searching the property. With the family butler, Ollie Waitley, at his side, Lindbergh moved through the house and into the cold night air. Beneath the nursery window, they found distinct impressions in the soil, broken sections of a wooden ladder, and the child's blanket, clues that indicated a serious crime had just occurred. Waitley called the Hopewell police, while Lindbergh contacted his attorney, Henry Breckenridge, and alerted the New Jersey State Police, setting into motion one of the most intense investigations the country had ever seen. Police from Hopewell and the New Jersey State Police immediately launched a thorough search of the Lindbergh home and surrounding property. Investigators examined the ransom note and the wooden ladder, but no usable fingerprints or footprints were found. Experts concluded the kidnapper had likely worn gloves and covered their shoes to avoid leaving traces. Even areas of the nursery that multiple adults had touched showed no fingerprints, except for the child's. The ransom note itself was short, handwritten, and filled with unusual spelling and grammar. It demanded $50,000 and warned the Lindberghs not to involve the police. At the bottom was a strange symbol of interlocking circles with punched holes, later referred to as the note's signature. Experts determined the letter was written by one person, likely someone whose first language was not English. Investigators even created a sketch of a possible suspect based on their analysis. The ladder was also carefully examined. Although built imperfectly, it showed signs of woodworking experience. The type of wood, nail patterns, and construction style later became crucial evidence in the trial of Bruno Richard Hauptmann. On March 2, 1932, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover offered federal assistance, even though the Bureau did not yet have full jurisdiction. Weeks later, President Franklin D. Roosevelt officially allowed the FBI to coordinate the investigation, marking a turning point in federal involvement. A $25,000 reward was also posted, an enormous sum at the time. During the investigation, several individuals attempted to insert themselves into the case. One was Gaston B. Means, who falsely claimed he could help recover the child. He convinced a wealthy socialite to give him $100,000, then failed to return the child or the money. Means was later convicted of embezzlement. Another early person of interest was a household employee, Violet Sharp, but she took her own life before investigators could fully question her. Her involvement was later dismissed after her alibi was confirmed. Then, on May 12, 1932, tragedy struck again when the Lindbergh baby's body was found in a wooded area about 4.5 miles from the family home. He had died from a skull fracture, likely caused during the kidnapping. The discovery confirmed the worst fears and intensified the nationwide manhunt for the kidnapper. In 1934, Bruno Hauptmann was arrested after a large portion of the ransom money was found in his home. He was tried in 1935, convicted of first-degree murder and kidnapping, and executed in 1936. Yet questions remain. The ladder used in the crime was carefully built and customized. Some experts believe it would have been nearly impossible for one man to make and carry it alone. Multiple ransom notes were mailed over weeks, leaving the possibility that someone else helped deliver them or even planned the kidnapping. Hauptmann always insisted he had never met the Lindbergh baby. Some researchers think he may have been a middleman handling the ransom, but not the mastermind. No one else was ever caught, leaving a chilling question. Did Bruno Hauptmann act alone, or did a hidden accomplice vanish into the shadows? The Lindbergh mystery may never be fully solved. In response, Congress passed what became known as the Lindbergh Law, officially the Federal Kidnapping Act of 1932. For the first time, kidnapping became a federal offense if the victim was taken across state lines. This gave the FBI full jurisdiction to investigate, track suspects, and coordinate nationwide operations. This case helped transform the FBI into the national investigative agency we know today. It set the stage for how federal cases are handled, how evidence is shared across states, and how major crimes are pursued. Modern law enforcement cooperation, from interstate alerts to federal task forces, traces its roots back to this moment in history. Although the case was tragic, the legal changes that followed ensured that criminals could no longer hide behind state borders. This single case reshaped the entire structure of American policing. Kitty Genovese, the case that transformed 911 response. New York City, 1964. A time when the city was growing fast and neighborhoods bustled with noise, nightlife, and people who lived side by side, but often knew little about each other. But one night in March, a shocking tragedy would raise a haunting question. How could someone be in danger while so many people nearby stayed silent? This is the story of Kitty Genovese, the event that sparked a national outrage, created the phrase, the bystander effect, and helped transform emergency response across the United States. Before her name was tied to a major psychological concept, Kitty Genovese was a 28-year-old woman living a normal life in Queens. She worked as a manager at a local bar, was known for her outgoing personality, and was described by friends as independent, witty, and full of energy. She lived in an apartment in the Kew Gardens area with her partner, Mary Ann Zilanko, in a building filled with families, workers, and young adults. Kitty worked late hours, often returning home in the early morning. It wasn't unusual for her to walk alone after closing the bar. But on March 13, 1964, what seemed like a routine night would take a devastating turn. Around 3 a.m., Kitty Genovese drove home after her shift. She parked her car just a short walk from her apartment building. The street was quiet, typical for that hour. As she headed toward her entrance, she was attacked. Kitty cried out for help, and lights flicked on in surrounding apartment windows. A few people looked out. Some thought they heard a disturbance. Others weren't sure what they were hearing. A man shouted from a window for the attacker to leave her alone, and for a moment the attacker retreated. Kitty, injured and frightened, tried to reach the back entrance of her building, where she believed she could get inside safely. But the attacker returned moments later and assaulted her again in the building's entryway. By the time a neighbor finally reached her and called for help, it was too late. Kitty Genovese died shortly after in the hospital. The tragedy itself was horrific, but it was the aftermath that stunned the nation. 2 weeks later, the New York Times published a front-page story claiming that 38 witnesses saw or heard parts of the attack and did nothing. The exact number would later be heavily debated. Some people only heard vague noises, others thought it was a domestic argument. A few didn't realize anything serious was happening, and several did try to help or call police. But that headline, 37 who saw murder didn't call the police, ignited outrage. How could so many witnesses fail to act? Why didn't someone pick up the phone? The article sparked a national conversation about responsibility, compassion, and the human instinct to freeze in group situations. The police department faced heavy criticism for its slow response and for unclear emergency procedures. At the time, calling the police wasn't as simple as dialing 911 because 911 didn't yet exist. People had to call the operator, explain their location, then be transferred to the appropriate station. Confusion and delay were common. In the wake of Kitty Genovese's case, city officials realized that everyday people needed a quick, universal way to reach help. Her case became one of the major catalysts for the creation of the modern 911 emergency system, which began just a few years later. 5 days after the murder, a man named Winston Moseley was arrested for an unrelated burglary. During questioning, he confessed to Kitty's attack. At his trial, Moseley was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. But while the case seemed legally closed, the story was far from over. The real impact of Kitty Genovese's tragedy was only just beginning. Psychologists Bibb Latané and John Darley were struck by the media coverage. They wanted to understand why people in groups might hesitate to help. Their research identified a pattern now known as the bystander effect. When more people are present, individuals feel less personal responsibility. Each person assumes someone else will take action. Confusion or uncertainty causes hesitation. People fear misinterpreting the situation. Their experiments showed that this wasn't a cruelty. It was human psychology reacting to a stressful moment. But the outcome was dangerous. When everyone assumes someone else will help, too often, no one does. Over the decades, journalists and historians revisited the case. Later investigations revealed several neighbors did try to call police, but their calls were mislabeled or not prioritized. Some people thought they heard a couple arguing, not a violent attack. A few witnesses later said they wanted to help but didn't know what to do. The 38 silent witnesses narrative was an exaggeration, but the core issue remained. People hesitated. Even with the misunderstandings, the tragedy still exposed something very real about human behavior in emergencies. The Kitty Genovese case left a massive legacy. Her story was frequently cited in the push to create a nationwide number to reach police, fire, and medical services immediately. The 911 emergency system was created. Good Samaritan laws were created. Many states passed laws offering legal protection to people who step in to help someone in danger. The bystander effect became a foundational lesson in psychology and is still taught around the world. Her case helped shift the way communities think about responsibility, encouraging people to act, call for help, and intervene safely when they can. Kitty Genovese's story is heartbreaking, but it also changed systems, laws, and awareness across the United States. Her name became a call to action, a reminder that doing something, even something small, can save a life. And today, when someone calls 911, when strangers step up to help, when people refuse to look the other way, part of that is because of what happened on that quiet night in 1964. The murder of Adam Walsh, 1981. The case that changed America. In the summer of 1981, a case unfolded that would forever change how America protects its children. It began in Hollywood, Florida, with a shy 6-year-old boy named Adam Walsh. On July 27th, Adam went with his mother to a Sears department store. While she browsed for a few minutes, Adam stayed near a small group of kids playing video games, something completely normal for the time. But when she returned, Adam wasn't there. The first hours were filled with confusion, assumptions, and missed opportunities. In 1981, there were no standardized national protocols for missing children. Police departments made their own rules. Some waited hours before responding. Some treated missing children as runaways. There was no central system, no shared database, no consistent urgency. And those gaps in the system would become painfully clear in Adam's case. A massive search was launched, but investigators quickly realized they were working without tools that should have existed. There were no rapid alerts, no unified communication between jurisdictions, and no national organization dedicated to missing children. Adam's case became national news, his face on front pages, his parents desperately pushing for answers, and a country watching helplessly. And yet, as heartbreaking as the outcome was, what came afterward would shape the future of child safety in ways no one could have imagined. Adam's father, John Walsh, refused to let his son be remembered only as a victim. Instead, he became a force for change. Because of this one case, the United States created systems that protect children every single day. In 1984, Congress created the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, or NCMEC for short, the first national clearinghouse for missing children. It standardized search procedures, offered support to families, coordinated with law enforcement, and created a central database so evidence and sightings no longer got lost between jurisdictions. Today, NCMEC handles thousands of cases a year and has helped recover tens of thousands of children. The Adam Walsh Child Protection and Safety Act of 2006 federal law created a national sex offender registry, uniform registration standards across all states, better tracking of offenders who crossed state lines, tougher penalties for crimes against children. Before this, every state had its own rules, and offenders could disappear simply by moving. This law changed that. When a child goes missing inside a store today, and you hear a Code Adam announcement, that exists because of this case. It's now used in retailers, museums, federal buildings, and theme parks across the country. Adam's case wasn't the only one that influenced Amber Alerts, but it helped create the momentum behind fast response systems. Today, when a child is abducted, alerts can go out instantly. Phones, highways, TV, radio. Millions of people notified in seconds. This didn't exist before the early 2000s, and it exists, in part, because Adam's story made the nation understand the cost of delay. Adam Walsh's story is one of the most tragic in American true crime history, but it is also one of the most transformative. His legacy is not measured in what was lost, but in the millions of children who are now protected because of the systems built in his name. A child's disappearance exposed deep flaws in America's protection laws. What happened next helped reshape the entire country. And that is why the case of Adam Walsh is not just a tragedy. It's one of the most important turning points in U.S. criminal justice history. The Stanford Prison Experiment Fallout Zimbardo Case, 1971. In 1971, a quiet basement hallway at Stanford University became the stage for one of the most infamous psychological experiments in history. An experiment meant to study human behavior instead became a lesson in how quickly power can spiral and how urgently ethical rules were needed. This is the fallout of the Stanford Prison Experiment and why it changed research laws forever. The study was led by psychologist Philip Zimbardo, who wanted to understand how people act when placed in roles of power and submission. He recruited 24 college-age volunteers and randomly assigned them to two groups, guards and prisoners. A mock prison was built in the university basement. What happened next shocked the world, not because of violence, but because of how fast ordinary people slipped into extremes. Within days, guards adopted authoritarian behavior. Prisoners showed signs of extreme stress. And Zimbardo, acting as the prison superintendent, became part of the problem, losing objectivity and allowing the experiment to continue even as things went wrong. The experiment was meant to last 2 weeks. It was shut down after just 6 days. The fallout was immediate. When news of the study reached the public, the central question was simple. How did an experiment like this get approved? And the answer was, because research ethics in the United States were extremely underdeveloped. There were no strong protections for volunteers participating in psychological studies. The Stanford Prison Experiment exposed just how dangerous that lack of oversight could be. After the shutdown, several investigations and academic reviews launched. The study became a case study in what not to do in scientific research. Scholars criticized the lack of informed consent, the absence of safeguards if participants became distressed, Zimbardo's dual role as researcher and superintendent, which removed all neutrality, the failure to stop the experiment sooner, whether the experiment was flawed, biased, or poorly controlled became the subject of debates that continue today. But one thing was clear. Changes were needed. How the case changed U.S. research laws. The Stanford Prison Experiment became one of the catalysts for a major transformation in American research ethics. Shortly after the 1970s, pushed by controversies including Zimbardo's study, the U.S. created stronger nationwide protections for anyone participating in research. Here's how it changed the rules. Institutional review boards, IRBs, became mandatory. Universities and research institutions were now required to have independent committees review studies before they happened. These IRBs had the power to approve, reject, or demand changes to protect participants. Informed consent became a legal standard participants now had to be fully informed about, the purpose of the study, any potential risks, their right to withdraw at any time. No more vague explanations or hidden motivations. The Gilmont Report, 1979. The U.S. government released a document outlining essential ethical principles: respect for persons, beneficence, do no harm. Just as this became the backbone of all research ethics in America, psychological research guidelines tightened. The American Psychological Association, APA, revised its ethics code, adding strict rules on deception, mandatory debriefing, requirements to stop studies if participants show distress, a ban on researchers playing roles that affect objectivity. Zimbardo's superintendent role, now strictly prohibited. Today, the Stanford Prison Experiment is one of the most taught and most controversial studies in psychology. Some argue it revealed uncomfortable truths about human behavior. Others say it was too flawed to be meaningful. But its biggest legacy wasn't what it discovered about people. It was what it revealed about research itself, that without rules, oversight, and real protections, even well-intentioned studies can cross ethical boundaries. The fallout of the Zimbardo case reshaped the standards that now protect millions of research participants across the United States and beyond. Every crime story has two sides: the event itself and the impact it leaves behind. In this case, the damage done inside a pretend prison became the push America needed to rewrite the laws that protect real people.